Welcome back to another sew along. Today I'm sewing a chic belted dress from Unfettered Patterns. With its clean lines, dropped shoulders, boat neckline, and sleek welt pockets, this dress is all about understated elegance with everyday comfort. For my version, I used a charcoal rayon linen blend from mytextilefabric.com. It combines the breezy texture of linen with the fluid drape of rayon, which is absolutely perfect for a summer dress. And guess what? I ditched the serger today. I finished all of my seams using the overcast stitch on my sewing machine with an overcast foot. It worked beautifully, and best of all, I didn't have to thread my serger. So grab your fabric, fire up your machine, and let's sew this stylish dress together step by step. Here is my front dress pattern piece, and I've drawn the rectangle for where my welt pocket will be placed. Just going by the dots on the pattern piece for my size and creating a rectangle that's about 5 inches by 1/2 inch. And I'm going to cut out the rectangle. Here is the wrong side of my front dress fabric. I've cut a piece of interfacing that's larger than the welt opening, and I'm going to fuse it in place where that welt rectangle will be. Using my pattern piece to center that interfacing in place, then fusing it with the iron. Then I'll transfer the rectangle onto the interfacing, as well as transferring the rectangle onto the right side of the fabric. And I'll mark a line straight down the center of my rectangle. I've applied interfacing to the wrong side of my welt piece. I'm going to fold it right sides together and pin the short edges. Sew the short edges with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Trim the seams, clip the corners, and turn the piece right side out, then give it a good press. Place the welt onto the right side of your dress piece so that the raw edge aligns with the center marking that we drew in the middle of our welt opening. Pin in place. Baste the welt in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Place your rear pocket piece right sides together with the welt, aligning the raw edges. The dots on the pattern piece should align with the edges of the welt, so you'll have pocket material extending beyond the welt on both sides. Pin in place. Sew from dot to dot from one edge of the welt to the other, right on top of the original basting stitches with the same 1/4 inch seam allowance. Place your pocket lining piece right sides together with the dress so that the raw edges of each pocket butt up next to each other. Pin in place. Sew from dot to dot as transferred from the pattern piece with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to slash in between the pockets and through the dress material, stopping 3/8 of an inch away from the outer edges of the rectangle that we transferred onto the dress. Then we're going to snip diagonally to the edges of the rectangle on both sides. This will leave a tiny triangle of dress fabric on both sides of the welt opening. Turn both of the pockets to the inside of the dress and then give those seams a good press. So here is what the welt now looks like from the outside of the dress, with the welt pressed toward the side seam and those pocket seams pressed nicely from the outside. We're going to top stitch on the dress side of the material along this inner sewn edge of the welt from top to bottom. As we do this, we'll be catching the seam allowance of the pocket on the inside. So make sure that the seam allowance on the inside is pressed flat and that those pockets are pressed out of the way. Now that that innermost pocket seam allowance has been top stitched in place, I'm going to flip my pockets to the inside of the dress as they'll sit when worn. And I'll pin the pockets together around the outer edge. We're going to sew around the outer curved edge of the pocket with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. At both sides of the welt opening, we're going to sew those pocket edges to that tiny triangle that remained when we opened the welt. We're going to be sewing along that original drawn line that we transferred in the beginning. Finish those raw edges together for the side and curved edges of the pocket in your preferred method. I'm going to be using my overcast stitch and overcast foot. Now from the outside of the garment, we're going to make sure that the welt is centered over its opening and that the folded edge is now oriented toward the side seam, and we'll top stitch those side edges in place. Repeat this entire process to construct your welt for the opposite side of the dress. Place your front and back dress pieces right sides together along the shoulder seams and pin in place. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges in your preferred method and press either open or toward the back. I'm choosing to finish my seam allowances together and press them toward the back of the garment. I've applied interfacing to the wrong sides of both of my facing pieces. Now I'll place them right sides together and pin the shoulder seams. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and press the seams open. Finish the outer raw edges of your facing in your preferred method. Here are my front and back dress pieces opened out at the shoulder seam. I'm going to place my facing right sides together with the neckline, aligning the shoulder seams and pinning in place all the way around. Sew the facing to the neckline all the way around with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to clip into the seam allowance all the way around. Then I'll turn my facing to the inside of the dress and give the neckline a good press. Now I'm going to understitch the facing, opening the facing away from the neckline and sewing the seam allowance to the facing all the way around with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. To keep the facing from flopping around on the inside of the dress, I'm going to stitch in the ditch of the shoulder seam from the outside, placing the needle inside that shoulder seam so that it comes out inside the shoulder seam of the facing, sewing the facing in place from the neckline to the finished edge, repeating on both sides. Place the front and back dress pieces right sides together and pin the side seams. Sew your seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges and press the seams toward the back of the garment. Along the bottom of the sleeve, I'm going to pre-press the hem allowance to the wrong side. First, pressing the full hem allowance to the wrong side by 1 1/4 inches, then opening that out, and pressing the raw edge to the wrong side by 1/4 of an inch. Then I'll open out my creases and fold the sleeve in half right sides together, aligning the short edges. And pin. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges together and press them toward the back of the sleeve. Now that that seam is sewn and finished, I'll fold my hem up along the pre-pressed creases, making sure that 1/4 inch is tucked under, and pin in place. Edge stitch close to the upper inner fold all the way around. Repeat to create both sleeves. With my sleeve right side out and my dress wrong side out, I'll place the sleeve inside the armhole so that the pieces are right sides together. Align the underarm seams and align the notch at the top of the sleeve with the shoulder seam. Align your front and back notches as well and pin in place all the way around. Sew the sleeve in place with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges together, and repeat to install both sleeves. We're going to hem the bottom of the dress in the exact same way as we hemmed the bottoms of the sleeves. I first folded the bottom edge to the wrong side by the full hem allowance of 1¼ inches. Then I pressed that raw edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch. Now I'll fold the hem in place and pin. Edge stitch along the upper inner fold all the way around. To create the belt, fold your piece right sides together lengthwise. Pin the long edges and both short edges. Stitch starting at the pointed edge of one short edge of the belt with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Leave a gap somewhere in your stitches of about 3 inches for turning. And continue your stitches to the opposite short pointed edge of the belt. Turn your belt right side out through the gap in your stitches. Give your belt a good press. Then we'll edge stitch the gap in our stitches closed. Now the belted dress is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.